Hello, welcome back to my channel if you're new here. My name is Mary and today's video is going to be my best books of 2024. I usually try to make this like a top 10 list. I don't know actually how successful I thought I've been in the past because I have a feeling that this happens to me every year. This year I have a top 6 and then I have like 10 honorable mentions that I feel equally about each of them, and so I can't really like narrow it down more, but I do have like a 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. So I am going to start with the 10 honorable mentions, if you will. These are all books that I loved. These are all books that I read this year, had a great time with, would highly recommend to people if they sound like something you're interested in. This is going to be in no particular order just because that's the way I'm going to do this. So I'm going to start with Just Like Home by Sarah Gailey. This is 16, I suppose, but again, 16 through 7 are going to be just 10 books that I loved that I can't really narrow down more than that. Just Like Home is a horror book. It's about a haunted house. It's my type of horror because it does have the like light tone to it that I really enjoy in a horror book. Think things like Grady Hendrix, or there's a Geneva Rose book that came out. I really enjoyed that book too. That was close to making it on this list, but I did like this one more. This is a 22 release and it's about a woman named Vera who is going home because her mother is very ill and she and her mom have a really terrible relationship. And she lived in a haunted house growing up. And so it's about like how the house got haunted and like what happened in her childhood that she's like either blacked out or didn't know. This was so good. I loved it. I love a relationship that examines like family dynamics. And also I loved the like house being a character. I thought that was so fun. I had a great time reading that book. The next book, again, in no apparent order, The Plot by Jean Homp Corlitz. This is a mystery thriller. I read this around the same time that my mom read it, so we talked about it together, which was very fun for me. I actually listened to the audiobook of this, so I have not read this physical copy, but this is about a guy who is a failed English teacher. No, a failed writer. He now teaches at in an MFA program, a Master of Fine Arts program for writing, and he has a student 1 year who is a total jerk, and the student has this like great idea for a plot, and he's like very conceited about it, and years pass and this book is never published. And so one day this professor, our main character, is looking into the student that he had and he finds out that the student died. And he thinks, no one ever published that plot. Maybe I should do it. And he does it and he becomes like a success. And it sort of goes from there. I love this book. I thought it was so fun. I did think it was interesting that the actual plot of the very unique plot is something that I've seen multiple times. It's a good plot, but like it's not as unique as this book made it sound like it was going to be, which is understandable because there's not really that many like totally unique stories out there that can't be like tied into something that you've read before or seen before or heard before, etc. But this one, it was funny because I had just read another book that had the same plot as this, like right before reading it. And then there's another book that has the same plot that is referenced in this book. So it just cracked me up. Laptop is gonna die, so I'm gonna write these down in an actual list and I'll be right back. Okay, picking up where we left off, we have The Mercy of Gods by James S.A. Corey. This I read actually because it was nominated in the Goodreads Choice Awards for Best Sci-Fi, and it's the first in a new sci-fi series. This is the same author of The Expanse series, which I have not read, but now I would really like to. I love this book. It's about a group of humans who are living on a different planet because Earth is no longer inhabitable, presumably. And they've been there for like decades at this point, or generations maybe even. But they get invaded by an alien species that takes several like types of humans, I guess, captive. And it's like this group of researchers and scientists who are trying to figure out like why they've been held captive. Of course, more things happen. And there's like really interesting dynamics between the characters because they like knew each other on this other planet where they were all working together. But now like, obviously things are different because they're like, the dynamics have changed. So it's a really interesting look at like human dynamics, but it's also like they're basically being psychologically tortured by these like alien creatures and they don't know what the alien creatures want with them. So I'm very excited to continue in the series as more books get published, and I really, really enjoyed it. I haven't read like I don't even know what kind of like, it's like epic high fantasy or whatever is what I would think of with like high fantasy, but I don't know if this is like high sci-fi because it's not really, maybe it's hard science sci-fi. It's not as hard science as something like The Three Body Problem, but I haven't read anything that's like sci-fi this intensely in a while. And so I was very pleased to have picked this one up and I really, really enjoyed it. Then I have Michigan vs. the Boys by Carrie S. Allen, which is a YA contemporary about a girl named Michigan who plays hockey. and she lives in Michigan, which is kind of funny, but she goes to school. She's on her school's hockey team. She's supposed to be like the assistant captain this year. And she shows up at the first day of school and they've actually cut the girls' hockey team. And so all of the girls on the team sort of do like come to peace with it in their own ways. Like one of the girls, I think her name's Bree. She's our main character's best friend. She ends up moving to a boarding school so she can play hockey and continue playing hockey because her parents can afford to do that. There's some girls who end up joining the swim team instead or do like other extracurriculars. Some girls just don't do anything. And then some girls go out for a neighboring schools or neighboring like towns team. And our main character can't do any of those things because she can't afford to go to a boarding school and her parents both work, so she can't get rides to the neighboring town or whatever. Like that's not gonna work for her. So she ends up going out for the boys team. And then she is like harassed and bullied and hazed and abused by the boys team because they don't like her. And it's about that. I love this book. It's in a similar vein to Beartown by Frederick Bachman, but like in the amount of like anger and frustration that I felt reading it, and also like, I don't know, just the gut feeling that something bad is gonna happen. But I really, really enjoyed this book, and I think it's a really solid read if you have not read it already. Then I have Saving Ruby King by Catherine Adele West, and this is a multi-generational story of sorts, but it's about a girl who, the like main plot line is present day. We've got Ruby King, whose parents are in an abusive marriage, and her mom ends up shot dead in her house, and Ruby, like everyone sort of thinks that Ruby's dad killed her. And then we have Ruby's best friend Layla, who is the pastor's daughter, and the pastor is friends with Ruby's parents or like knows them from his childhood. So that's like one of the generations. And then their like grandparents all knew each other too. So that's another of the generations. So it's like this layered story, but Layla wants Ruby to come live with her after her mom dies because she doesn't think it's safe for her to live with her dad. But Layla's dad is like, no, we're not getting involved in this. And she doesn't understand why. And so you sort of see through all the different lenses, like what actually is going on in this community, in this town, and well, it's Chicago, but like in their community, in their church, and all sorts of like in their personal lives. And I love this book. It's also got a chapter that is told from the perspective of a church, which is something kooky that I really enjoy. So I had a really great time with this one. Next, I have You'd Look Better as a Ghost by Joanna Wallace, which is a book that I actually just read. And it might have come out, it definitely came out this past year. I don't know if it came out like in November or December. I don't know if it was nominated for the Goodreads Choice Awards. I think it probably was. But this is about a female serial killer who, it's kind of like, she's kind of a vigilante killer where she like only kills people that she thinks deserve it. But her dad has just died. So she's in this like grief group. And in her grief group, someone confronts her about murdering somebody, and she has to like cover her tracks. And that's like essentially what it's about. I love this book. It's so fun. It's very funny. It's very like dry humor, but like also I just loved the like sort of complex look at grief that it gave, even though it's like, I don't know, it's like kind of goofy, but it was a really, really fun read, and I'm really glad that I read it. Then I have Rock, Paper, Scissors by Alice Feeney, which is another mystery thriller. This is about a couple who is having some marital problems. And so they decide to go up into the like Scottish Highlands. They were in a cabin for the weekend, and it's like a snowy, snowed-in cabin vibe. But something's not right with the cabin. The other like key details are that the husband has, what is it called? He's face blind. He can't recognize people's faces. And parts of the story are told from the perspective of letters written by the wife to the husband. And that's what it's about. And it's so good. It's so twisty. It really threw me off. I read another Alice Feeney this year that I did not like at all. So it's really fun to me that one of them is one of my favorite books of the year and the other one I hated. So then I have Shadow and Bone by Leigh Bardugo, which is part of the Grishaverse series. It's this first book in a trilogy. I read the whole trilogy this year, or last year. I'm currently working on reading my way through 6 of Crows. Shadow and Bone is about this girl, Alina, who is, I don't know how old she's supposed to be. I think she's like 16 to 18, somewhere in there, like late teens. And she's part of the army, the like human army in this world. She's a soldier, and she's got this like lifetime friend who she grew up in foster care with named Mal. And they also, like, she has a really big crush on Mal, but Mal's also kind of a lady killer. You know how it is. So it's unrequited love for her. But she discovers one day, because Mal's in trouble, she has this thing happen to her where she is able to like create light. She's called a sun summoner, and it's a very rare ability in this world, and no one else can do it. So usually people who have magic are called Grisha, and usually Grisha are discovered when they're children. But for whatever reason, Alina was never discovered until now. And there's this guy called the Darkling who his power is to like create darkness or whatever. So it's the opposite of hers. It's like the yin to her yang, if you will. And he's the only one who can do that. She's the only one who can do her sun summoning thing. So he whisks her way to the capital to what's called the Little Palace to be trained in her abilities. And things sort of go from there. It ends up being like a big battle between good and evil. And there's like a love triangle element for a little bit. I wish the love triangle lasted longer, which is shocking to me that I wanted that, but I did. Yeah, I really, really enjoyed this book a lot. I enjoyed the whole series. I had a really good time with it. There's a lot of really fun characters. I will say the third book, especially, you get into like more of a tighter cast. So the first book and the second book, really, you only care about like 4 characters, but there's so many people. And then there are more characters that you care about in the third book, but also it's like, it feels tightened up. I don't know how else to say it, but it's a really good series. The next book I have on this list is In a Dark, Dark Wood by Ruth Ware. This is a mystery thriller. I love Ruth Ware. Personally, for me, she keeps banging out hits. Like, she is one of my favorite authors of all time. There are some books by her that I don't love. The Death of Mrs. Westaway comes to mind. There's another one that I think I gave 3 stars that I thought was fine, but In a Dark, Dark Wood is so good. It's about this group of people who were like friends in high school, I think, and then they sort of separated, like grew up, were not friends anymore. They're in their late 20s, early 30s now, I think, in the start of this book, and one of them is getting married, and she's invited all of them to her bachelorette party. And our main character is like, I haven't spoken to this girl in a decade. I don't know why she's invited me to her bachelorette party, but she's gonna find out. And it's crazy. It's so good. It's just so good. I love that book. The last like honorable mention I have to mention is called A Lady's Guide to Fortune Hunting by Sophie Irwin. And this is the first book in a like Regency romance series. This is a very clean Regency romance. Like, there's no smut in it, which usually I like a little bit of smut. So it's kind of surprising to me that I love this book as much as I did, but I really, really loved like the banter, the characters. I thought they had a really cute like get together story, but it's about this girl who is the oldest daughter, and her family situation is such that she has to marry rich to provide for her sisters because her parents are dead. They didn't really leave them with a lot except for debt. And so she's supposed to be marrying this guy in her town who's like the richest guy in her town, but he calls off their engagement and marries someone else. So she has to go to London, and she brings one of her sisters with her, and they go to London for the season to try to find a rich husband for her. And it's about that, but also like she sets her sights on this guy, Archie, who's the younger brother in like a titled family, but he's not going to have the title. So she thinks it'll be easier to get him to marry her. And then his brother comes to town, called Lord Radcliffe, I think is what his name is. That could be someone else, actually. Forget I said that. I don't know who the brother is. Regardless, he comes to town and is like, hey, I know you're a fortune hunter. He can like tell from a mile away what she's doing. And he does some digging and finds out some like not so savory things about her parents' past. And in return, he's like threatening to out her if she doesn't leave his brother alone. But she says, I will go elope with your brother, or you can help me find a different husband and I'll leave your brother alone. And so he agrees to help her, and then they fall in love. It was so good. I loved that book. I thought it was just like such a fun romp. Not at all historically accurate to what would have actually happened at that time, but a great time nonetheless. I really enjoyed it. Now we're getting into my top 6 books of the year that are actually numbered. So without further ado, number 6 is Mary by Nat Cassidy. This is a horror book. Nat Cassidy said he wrote it about like, he was thinking about what it would be like if Carrie from the Stephen King book was like going through menopause or was like a middle-aged woman. So that's like the gist, but we follow this character Mary who has lived in New York City for most of her adult life. And then she gets a call from an aunt back in Arizona, I think. It's either Arizona or New Mexico. I can never remember one of those. And the aunt is like, I'm getting very sick. I need someone to come take care of me. I took care of you when you were a child. Come take care of me. And so she does. And her aunt is like a really hateful person. But in this town, there's like this weird vibe, I guess, like cult vibe. And Mary is like learning more about that. There's also these murders that happened a long time ago. It was women that were killed, and they were killed in a very like specific ritualistic way. And those murders have sort of started happening again. So they think there's either a copycat killer because the original killer died, or they think maybe he didn't actually die. Ooh, it's so good. It's very, again, it has like the balance of humor that I really enjoy. There's a lot of body horror in this one, like a lot. And Mary is going through menopause, but any woman that's her age, she sees them as like these disgusting creatures. Like she hallucinates nasty body horror things on them, which is just very interesting. So she like can't look in the mirror because she sees it on herself too. So she's kind of like going insane. But I loved that book. It was so good. Number 5, I have What the River Knows by Isabel Ibanez, which is the first book in a series. It's like a YA historical fantasy mystery series. It's comped to The Mummy and Death on the Nile. It's set in Egypt for the most part. So we have our main character who is from Argentina, and her parents were like explorers, anthropologists, archaeologists, something, and they spent half their time in Egypt, half their time in Buenos Aires. And she was always left behind. And then one day she gets a letter from, I think, her uncle, who says like, hey, your parents are missing, presumed dead. I'm gonna be in charge of their estate. I will give you your allowance. Talk to me, like, let me know if you have any problems. And she decides, I'm going to Egypt, because that's where her uncle is too. So she goes to Egypt. She sneaks her way into her uncle's like expedition, and they are looking into Cleopatra and her grave, because I believe nobody knows where Cleopatra is buried. So they're trying to find where her tomb is. And there's like a little bit of romance between Inez, our main character, and this guy Whit, who is a British student of sorts. He's like the assistant to her uncle's expedition. It was so good. I have, spoiler for, again, my January wrap up, I have the sequel out for my library right now, and I'm very excited to finally be reading it. I put it on hold in October, I think, and it got to me like the other day. So I will be reading that, and I hope it is just as good as the first one, because the first one ends on a quite big cliffhanger. But yes, that is one of my favorite books of the year. It's my 5th favorite book of the year, actually. 4th favorite, Listen for the Lie by Amy Tintera. This is one that I really think you would benefit from listening to the audiobook of, which is how I read it, but I think you could read it physically and still enjoy it. I just think the audiobook is the way to go, because it's like so well produced, and it's a full cast, and there's a podcast element of the book, so you can like listen to the podcast in the audiobook. I just think it's a really great way to read it. But this is about a woman who, when she was in her early 20s, her best friend ended up dead, and she was like the last person seen with her best friend, and she ended up covered in blood, like walking along the side of the road. So people in her town basically think that she killed her friend, but there was never enough evidence to prove it. And she moved away. And this is like 5 to 10 years in the future from that incident happening. And there's now a true crime podcaster who is trying to figure out what happened in her hometown. And she gets like roped into helping him, because she wants to know if it was her. She wants to know if it was her. And then if it wasn't her, which she like obviously hopes it's not, she wants to figure out who did it. And this book was so twisty, so turny. I love the podcast element. It really worked for me. I had a great time with this one. Again, it's a very serious mystery thriller that has a lot of like humor in it. That's what I need to make heavy books palatable for me. I need them to be kind of funny sometimes. So I had a great time with this one. I thought it was so good. My 3rd favorite book is a memoir. It's called Everything I Know About Love by Dolly Alderton. And this is a memoir, obviously, about Dolly Alderton's life. And it's about her like growing up and relationships she was in. It's also, there's this particularly like heartbreaking part about a friend of hers in this relationship that she was in, and then that relationship not working out, and what that sort of does to her view of love, what that does to her friend's view of love. It's about like friendship, family, romantic love, all kinds of love for humanity. It's so good. I know Dolly Alderton has written several like novels. I've read one of them. I won't spoil how I feel, because that will also be in my January wrap up. But I loved this book. It really did, like, I don't know, it touched me in a way that like I wasn't really expecting it to. And I'm so glad that I read it. My 2nd favorite book of the year is The Dutch House by Anne Patchett. And this is a book that I've talked a lot about this year. I absolutely love this book. It's about these siblings, and they grew up in this house. Their dad was this like wealthy property developer, and he bought them and their mother this like dream house. And then their mom left their family, and their dad remarried a woman who didn't like them and had her own kids. And so when their dad remarried, his kids got like relegated to the outskirts almost of this house, and their rooms were taken over by these other kids. Then their dad died, and their stepmom kicked them out. And so I think the girl was already like college age, but she couldn't go to college because she got kicked out. And then she found out that their dad had put aside money for the son to go to college. And so he ends up going to college and like going to like grad school, med school, doing all this schooling stuff because he wants to use up the like inheritance, because it's his money. He like is prioritized over the stepchildren in the will or something. So it's like kind of a way to say like fuck you to the stepmom basically. But the whole book is about him and his sister trying to get back into this house. And that's like the one thing that they want of their father that they cannot get. And it's so good. They're like obsessed with this house. They're always driving by it. It ruins their lives basically because of how obsessed with this house they are. I love this book. It made me laugh. It made me cry. It's so like moving. And also like, I say that I love a multi-generational family story, and this is technically just one generation, but it really did like feel so, it was like all encompassing of their whole lives. Like it's like a 50-year span in this book, and I just loved it. I could not get enough of it. If you want to take a pause, you can try to guess what my favorite book of the year is. I don't know if you'll be able to guess, but maybe. So if you want to, guess what you think my number one book of the year is going to be. Okay, that should be enough time. My number one book of the year is Kept Animals by Kate Milliken. So this is a kind of historical fiction book. It's about a girl, Rory Ramos, who is in the past timeline. So Rory Ramos grows up, is a war correspondent, and has died. But she has a daughter, like a teenage daughter that she's leaving behind. And this book is basically the teenage daughter being told the story of her mother's life and also of like her own conception. So her mom lived on this ranch in, I think it's supposed to be the 70s, the 80s maybe? I don't really know. The 80s maybe? I don't know. But it's like this horse ranch where the mom lived, and as Rory Ramos. And she was raised by her stepdad, who is also the guy who ended up raising her own daughter later when she was off doing war correspondent stuff. And so it's about her like learning about herself as a person, training horses, this one summer in her life that is the summer that she ends up conceiving her daughter. And it was so good, so moving. I read this book over a year ago now, and I think about it all the time constantly. So it's definitely my favorite book of the year. It's one of my favorite books of all time. I need to buy a copy of it just to have forever. I always say this, it looks like it would be for horse girls. I think if you're a horse girl, you could like it. But as a non-horse girl, as a person who really does not like horses much at all, I loved it. I thought it was fantastic and so moving and so like well plotted, well developed. It really made me care about the characters in it. So that's all I can really ask for. But those are my top 6 plus 10 honorable mentions from 2024. Let me know in the comments down below if you've read any of these books and how you felt about them. Also, let me know what your number one book of 2024 was, if you know, or if you can't narrow it down, what some of your favorite books this year were. Thank you so much for watching. As always, if you want to, you can subscribe to my channel. I do try to post 2 videos every week, and I will see you in another one very soon. Bye!